everyone, and welcome back to the Biblical Fiction Buffs podcast. I am here with a guest this time because it is February and the month of love and pink hearts and red roses and way too much unhealthy amounts of chocolate. And we are here to talk about Christian romance. And since I'm talking about Christian romance, I had no choice but to bring out the queen of reading Christian romance herself, Alicia from For the Love of Christian Fiction.blogspot.com. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Alicia.
Well, I mean, do I need more of an introduction? I am the queen of romance. At least that's a self-proclaimed title given to me by Jenna and myself. But, yeah, if it has romance, I have a lot to say about it. I don't read books if they don't have romance in them. And when they do, I love love.
I feel like that's the equivalent of like Gaston and Beauty and the Beast being like, what's the point of reading if there are no pictures? Except it's, what's the point of reading if there are no men? So yeah, it's February, it's Valentine's Day, it's the month of love and cute little cards and candy and all of those things, and we thought it would be fun to come on and talk about Christian romance books, and like, I'll be talking about biblical fiction romance books, so do not fear, but Christian romance books and what makes like a good Christian fiction romance book and what we like to see in Christian fiction, faith-based romance novels, and all of that kind of thing. And we've each picked out a couple of books, I think. I don't know how many you brought, but I found like 3 or 4, I think, of our favorite romance novels and what we like about them. And the conversation will just kind of develop organically from there. So stick around. It'll probably be a long one, accidentally, completely unplanned. But yeah, it should be fun. So what did you want to start?
Well, I'm sure.
You are the queen. I gave you a crown.
You gave me a crown. Now, heavy is the head that wears the crown. So, me taking responsibility. I limited myself to the amount of books, so everyone be proud of me, because if in any aspect, a little is not what I do. So I picked a few. And each had very similar aspects of what I love to see in romance, because at the end of the day, I want a healthy representation of what a relationship is. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
Wrong. Love the romance. I love chemistry. I love all that. But I also want there to be flaws and them to work through those things, because while fiction is fake, it derives from real life in some aspect or.
So true.
But the first one I'm going to talk about the big thing first and get it out of the way.
Oh, boy.
I brought a whole series.
Oh, you really limited yourself, didn't you?
I really limited myself.
You brought a whole series.
Just a whole series. But one of my favorites is the Hawthorne House series by Christiane Hunter. And I will just limit myself to talk about the romance part of the book. But this series is just wonderful in so many different aspects. But in particular, I will talk about 2 of the books. Afraid, which is book 1. I love this book. I got Jenna hooked on this book. You're welcome. So good. And one aspect that I loved about it was the brother's best friend trope, which there is just something about a good brother's best friend trope. And the letters that they wrote.
Yeah.
Sign me up. Take all my money.
I mean, yeah, especially without giving away spoilers. There's so much with the letters that's just like the best.
Chef's kiss. But there was a lot of like learning and growing that the characters themselves went through. And it just felt real in a way, like a relationship unfolding like that. But the one that felt like the most real life.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I wish more authors would talk about and deal with, and it's great. An Uncommon Courtship, which is Trent's story,
Mm-hmm.
deals with a newly married couple.
Yeah.
And not just, wow, fell in love, and then boom, epilogue, poof, they're married, fade to black, whatever.
They're married, they have like 3 kids, fade to black.
Yeah, like we actually get inside their marriage. And like something that happens once they're married that some newly married people deal with. And it was just a real conversation that you would have with a real person. It was handled and written beautifully.
Yeah, I would like to jump in here and just say that faith-based fiction doesn't mean for everyone. Like, you wouldn't give a younger kid like a book that's like clearly way above their reading level. So some books deal with more mature topics and themes than others, and that's fine because not every book is written for every person and every audience. And Christian fiction doesn't always mean teen fiction or YA fiction, although there are a bunch of authors that write Christian YA, Christian middle grade, Christian like elementary and kids fiction. That does not mean that every book that is under the Christian label is necessarily for every audience. And that's not even a bad thing either necessarily. It just means that like you wouldn't give, you know, a 14-year-old the same problems that like an older person might be relating to more. So just jumping in to throw that in the middle of the podcast.
Amen. And this is something that I 100%, this is a hill I will die on.
Yeah.
Let's start with this. Reading is subjective.
Oh, we're about to get real deep, really fast into this podcast.
We talk about the books we love, and then we go into why we love them. Reading is subjective.
We're not even 10 minutes in, and we're already getting to the heavy stuff.
Listen, Jen and I don't do idle chit-chat. We just go for the meat and the potatoes, okay?
Absolutely.
And all.
Especially potatoes. I love carbs. And metaphorical carbs, and emotional carbs, and, like, conversational carbs. I'm here for them all.
All of them. They're great. They are our substance.
Yeah.
But there is something for everyone, and that's why there's so authors who write so many things, and why people can be friends and still read different things. Mm-hmm. I am speaking to the queen of biblical fiction. Sometimes I have a huge biblical fiction collection and have read maybe 3 of those books. Sure. But that's her niche, and that's something that she loves, and it loves her, and she does it well. Have me. I read everything and love everything if romance is heavily involved. But then there's other people who don't read romance, and they want the women's fiction and the literary stuff.
True.
And that's awesome. Keep all the authors, give them job security.
Yeah.
Please. Keep reading.
And if you don't like romance, then maybe just skip this episode of the podcast, since that's all we're going to be talking about.
But everyone's level of what they find romantic, or what they find enjoyable, or what they enjoy in a romance novel is different.
Yeah.
And it's okay if someone likes something different than you. Even if they're like around the same age, they're in a different life.
Yeah.
Like different life area, events happening. They've matured different.
No, yeah, but like when you made me read A Noble Masquerade, which like we've been friends for years, we go way back, and it wasn't until like this past summer that we were like, what if we read one of each other's favorite books? Like, despite being friends for years and bonding over our mutual love for romance books at CFRR in like 2019 or something, like I read A Noble Masquerade, finally. I finally read a Christiane Hunter book, which felt like I was breaking the law being friends with you and not reading Christiane Hunter books, because you rant and rave about them so much in a good way. And I read it, and as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is Alicia. Like, it was so clearly obvious that this was an Alicia book because it was just you on every single page, and the story was amazing and the romance was amazing. And yeah, there's especially, like, I haven't read the rest of the series yet. I'm gonna get there. But like I said, like I said before we started this, all of my books are packed because I'm moving, so I have no books right now. But besides the point, like, there's a lot of things, and I feel like it's especially important to distinguish between healthy romance portrayals versus unhealthy romantic fiction portrayals. And the different, like, there's so much to romance. It's not just like instant love and then instant proposal and then instant happily ever after. Like, especially for me, the reason I started reading Christian fiction is because I was going through a really, 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 really hard time in my life, and I was just dealing with a lot, and there was a lot of stuff that I was going through, and I was always like a reader, so I was reading a lot, but the books that I read were not uplifting and they were not encouraging, and they presented an even darker worldview than the one that I was like struggling with at the time. So I started reading Christian fiction because it put me in a better mood. It put me in a better mindset. And I read a lot of Christian fiction because I want to learn something and I want to grow from reading it, or I want it to make me think about something in a different way. And like, especially with books that like portray like after happily ever after, or like different points in like relationships or married couples or like engaged couples or new couples. There's just so many different kinds of situations that like, I don't know. I just like reading romance books that portray certain things in a healthy way, because not everyone has a healthy example to look at, or they just don't know anyone who's gone through a particular thing, and maybe they find that thing in a story and then they read that story and it helps them relate and get through that too.
100%.
Yeah.
I started reading romance novels off the bat, like, but then
I'm not surprised.
Right? it just comes with the female territory in our house. We're all romance lovers. But I just, and again, this is where, going back to what you said, just because it's Christian fiction doesn't mean it's for everybody. It doesn't all ages. I truly believe that, yes, we're shining Christ through what they're shining through Christ, what they're doing, it is done well, especially after, if they're traditionally published, they've gone through the rigmarole of they've gone through the ringer of getting published and going through the story, so there's a lot of one thing. But still, if you have a young child who's reading something, maybe read through it first, make sure that you feel comfortable that they are going to be able to understand things. But I mean, I was 12 years old reading romance novels. Yeah. I didn't even look at it as, look at like the love story and all this and the kiss. It was just a good story. Yeah. And I loved love. And, I mean, what little girl doesn't think about like love and happily ever after? And I mean, you're told fairy tales your whole life. So of course you want to keep reading them and finding them. But that's not every 12-year-old little girl. That's not every 16-year-old girl. That's not every 18-year-old girl.
That's not every like 25, 30, on and on and on.
And that's okay. But I started reading romance just because, again, I loved love, and it made me happy. The older I've gotten, the more I appreciate it. Because I can step back and go, what if there's a young girl, healthy relationship in her life, or she's had all these thoughts and dreams, like who she could want to be. And I'm not, fictional men, fictional women, not real. Fictional
men written by non-fictional women.
They're always perfect. And that's not, I'm not saying get obsessed with them. Monkey see, monkey do. Because I am in love with fictional men. All my fictional. But I can also step away and go, okay, that is not real. Mm-hmm. But you can aspects of something that you like and something that you're finding healthy, and how people, how they're dealing with the situation, and say, because as a single girl myself, I know what I'm looking for.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I'll be honest, there are aspects of men in stories and fictional men, and I mean men in my life too, my grandpa and my dad and my uncles, and just good qualities that I found in people that I know I'll want in my husband. Mm-hmm. But there's aspects that I find in fictional where I'm like, that's important to me, because in somebody's world, there is someone like this. That's not always, but you know, how they treat people, the thoughtful, there are romantic men out in the world. It is a thing. So just kind of taking little things and to perspective, like, don't expect that this is going to be the real world and these are going to be real situations in, but you can still want good things.
Yeah. Yep. You've said everything. Podcast over, done. I don't need to share any of the books that I brought. We're fine. Yeah, I mean, as a married person, there's a lot I can't really say to this, but like thinking back to when I was single, but like my husband and I we're high school sweethearts, so that's like a really long time ago. But thinking back to like, you know, the couple of months where I was single in my life, like I read a lot of books and a lot of time, and well, I mean Disney movies, like you grow up watching Disney movies and princes and Prince Charmings, and then you're reading books and there's even more Prince Charmings. Like that definitely can influence a lot of your choices. And that, yeah, when you read Christian fiction, like not all books that are published are going to be great. Like reading is subjective, like you said, but especially when it comes to reading Christian fiction, especially if there's like a good amount of faith content in the book and the faith and like spirituality is portrayed in like a really good, strong way, it can just make you think and like change. Like obviously when you're a kid and you're like thinking like, oh, when I grow up, I want to marry someone that looks like Flynn Rider from Tangled. But then you might get to a point where you're like, when I grow up, I want to marry somebody that prays like this character, or that like does something like this character, is like a good leader like this character. Like there's a lot of, they're fictional, but they can have aspects that inspire you in a certain way. And the same goes for like female characters too, inspiring you just in general to be a better person or a better version of yourself. But in romance, like it definitely can make you think. And yeah, so the first book that I brought, because it's my turn to talk about books right now, is actually one that I had not forgotten about, but just that I haven't really thought about in a really long time. And I mean, honestly, I could pull an Alicia here and say, I want to talk about an entire series, because it's the Cities of Refuge series by Connie Lynn Cassette, and you're nodding your head because you're not surprised. But Connie Lynn Cassette just speaks to my soul and writes the most beautiful stories, but also the most beautiful love stories. And the thing that I think makes them so special in terms of like not just being a good love story, but a good story in general, kind of like how we were talking about earlier, is that each of the characters, the leading male protagonist and the leading female protagonist, learn something, and they're both growing separately while also growing as a couple. And that's what I like to see in Christian fiction, is when they both have things they need to learn, and it's not just like necessarily one of them is perfect and saving the other. And like they're both broken people and they're both learning, they're both growing, and a lot of times they're growing like in their faith and in their spiritual journey, and like growing closer to God. And like in that, it brings them both closer together just as it happens. Because I think that's very true to life. Like with me and my husband, like we kind of got together in high school and we got to know each other during high school. And, you know, we went to Christian school and church and those kinds of things. And just as we were both going through different life things and going to church and going to school and doing all of the, you know, Bible things and getting closer to God, we also got closer to each other, and our relationship kind of developed out of that, and like, you know, encouraging each other through scripture and then having our own scripture time, and then we just kind of naturally ended up together. So like specifically, I wanted to talk about Shelter of the Most High by Connie Lynn Cassette, and because my books are all packed away right now, I only remembered how deeply I loved this one by going through my old book reviews on my blog that I have not touched in months. And to say that I'm a book blogger at this point feels a bit like a fraudulent statement, like I'm committing some sort of identity theft on a previous version of myself. But I do still review books, just not always on my blog. I usually talk about them here on Instagram, but Shelter of the Most High is book 2 in the Cities of Refuge series, and the two main characters are Sophia and Eaton. I'm really bad. This is why it's so hard to be a biblical fiction reviewer, because it's almost impossible to pronounce the names of characters when I'm talking about the books. So if I'm talking about the books in a podcast, I'm just like, the male character was great. The female character was equally great, and that's it. But the thing that I love about Connie Lynn Cassette's books, and probably most books in general, but this one just stood out to me because of my review and how I actually was able to form coherent words in the past, is that the characters' journeys, a lot of times, their individual journeys and their individual arcs mirror each other, and they complement each other really well. And like, Alicia and I have a mutual friend named Audrey Bodine. We love each other. We have a group chat where we talk endlessly about Christian romance novels, but she's a writer, I'm a writer. Alicia's not a writer, she's a reader, but that's why our group works so well. And we talk a lot about romance books, and I remember as a writer just ranting with Audrey about like how hard it is to write Christian romance and like make characters where the romance is believable. And Audrey had shared some writing advice that I think she got from her mom at one point when she was working on something. And it was just like I can't really explain it exactly, but one of the best ways to create a fictional couple and write like a fictional romance is to figure out what each character has that the opposite character needs, and like why they need each other, as opposed like aside from just romance, like a deeper reason why they need each other besides just chemistry and cute scenes and all of that stuff, like something that takes the relationship to a deeper level. What qualities does the other character possess that the main character or the character opposite to them like needs, or vice versa, or however that's said. But in Shelter of the Most High, Sophia is like from a different culture. She doesn't speak the language. She has like no understanding of like Jewish Hebrew culture and their life, and I forgot how funny this book was, because she arrives and they rescue her, but she immediately thinks that she's like, I mean, it's not funny now that I'm saying it, it sounds kind of wrong, but like she immediately thinks that she's gonna be like sacrificed or something because she doesn't understand. There's like a language barrier between the two characters, which is just a whole other trope. She comes from a place of being very not trusting, because like as she gets to know them more and they learn to speak the same language, and she gets to know like the other characters and the other people in the story, you know, they're constantly trying to show her grace and show her like their way of living and their beliefs and like love and all that kind of stuff, and she has a really hard time trusting that because that's just so countercultural to her. Meanwhile, the main male character, which I really can't tell you what's wrong with him if you haven't read the first book in the series or the book before that one, because they're all like the last book in the Out from Egypt series and the first book in the Cities of Refuge series, because all of Connie's books are connected. But like, he just has trauma, and Alicia knows this. But I love when main male characters have trauma.
The more baggage, the better.
Yeah, the more baggage, the better. Absolutely. But, like, he has baggage and dark secrets and trauma and all of this stuff. And while she isn't willing to accept certain things just because she has like trust issues, he's not willing to accept grace necessarily for himself because like he doesn't think he deserves it. So he's like punishing himself, and he's punishing himself and not accepting grace, and she's pushing grace away because she just doesn't trust it. So their stories kind of complement each other, but then they also like go in different directions, and throughout the course of the story they both get closer together, and he and Eaton and his family try to be the light that she needs, and then she is something that he needs, and it's just really beautiful. And I love this story, and I love these characters, and I completely forgot how good this book was until I pulled out my old review. But it's such a good story, and I love it, and I love Connie, and all of her books are romantic and amazing and wonderful, but like romantic in the best way. That's like the characters have chemistry, but then they also like it's a good story, like you were saying. Like it's not just about like the chemistry and the one-liners and the cute moments and the adorable scenes. It's like the deeper story of like their souls becoming one, and I love it.
Absolutely. I was thinking, listen, banter gal, like a couple of my picks are on the more shallow side. Not gonna lie, we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But it's not just how a book makes us giggle and swoon and like, oh my goodness, they're gonna get together and it's so great, happily ever after. It's a mark of a great story when an author can make us sit back and almost mourn a character as they're going through this traumatic experience, as we're rooting for them, one, as a couple, because it's, we're excited for them to get together, but also as they're growing individually, because you want to see that in real life. You want to have your friend, like you want to yourself, your friends, you want to see them grow on their own as a person and know that they can stand on their own and stand on their own in the Lord, not independently, but stand firm. And but also the fact that when it's done in God's will and done right, and they're getting stronger that way, they're gonna get strong as a couple. So you can go through all of life's experiences with these characters and feel every single emotion. And I think that just marks a great story, but also a great romance, because romance isn't all butterfly chocolates. And even though we love Valentine's Day and all the Cupid and all the candy gross chalk hearts, we love to look at it from the good aspects, but really love is being in the trenches, and love is struggle and pain and going wherever the other person goes, no matter what.
I mean, listen, I feel like we really need to touch on the fact that those candy hearts are actually gross.
They are so gross.
Like, in the middle of our rant about how much we love, those candy hearts are disgusting.
They're awful.
It's literally eating chalk. But yeah, I mean, and like what you said too about like characters and people who can stand on their own, like that's in real life what a relationship should be. Like you shouldn't be necessarily looking to the other person for fulfillment or like for your identity. Like that should come from God, and then naturally, as you get closer to God and as that other person in your life hopefully gets closer to God, you naturally get closer together because you're united in Christ. And I love to see that in Christian fiction and see that portrayal where, obviously, like a character's, well, I mean, depending on the book you read, but like a character's sole motivation shouldn't necessarily just be love and romance and the other character. Like if you're reading a book and all the female character cares about is the guy character and all the guy character cares about is the girl character, like obviously that is not the most realistically healthy portrayal of a romance in the real world in a good story when the characters are growing individually and then they grow like closer together. It's just beautiful, and it's a beautiful thing to see, and it's a beautiful example too of like whereas you might have a lot more mainstream books where the characters only care about each other. The beauty of Christian fiction is that it shows you how characters can grow spiritually in a romantic relationship, and I love it. So feel free to share your next book now, because I will keep going on about Sophia and Eaton if you don't shut me up.
You were talking about it, and that's okay, don't get mad at me. I'm really, really sorry I'm about to say this. I read them out of order, but I read that one, and
it's fine.
I was like, no, you're right. I totally forgot. That book is so good, and it really is. She just has a beautiful writing style. She really is the queen of making a story complement. Like, you got storylines happening, and they're just all working very well together.
And it was so hard because I was like, I knew I was going to mention a Connie Lynn Cassette book in this podcast, but as I was going through them, I was like, but all of them are so good. But then that one I had just like hadn't thought about in forever, and I was like, wait, I need to go back and revisit this because this one was actually next level.
Oh, so good. But keeping on with the more like realistic,
yeah.
When I start to talk about this, it is not realistic. But in my head, this is probably one of the most healthy examples I've seen in a Christian fiction romance in a while. And I read primarily fiction, but I read romance primarily. So, anywho, that's neither here nor there. But I just finished Before I Called You Mine by Nicole Deese. Yeah. Listen, I understand the hype. I get it. I truly do. This is not a rant about covers. This is not a podcast covers, so I will keep...
I can bring you back for that if you want. We can make that a separate thing. If you need to vent, I can make space for you here.
Long video. Or podcast, excuse me, sorry. Coming out. But I finally picked it up, and when I tell you this relationship was a bit of instant love, which, while not super realistic, it's been known to happen.
It's historically been known to happen on occasion.
Common for people to fall in love at first sight, slightly. But it was a relationship that started out as a friendship, for which huge lover of all things that start as a friendship, because to me that is a great basis for a relationship, to make sure that you can stay friends with someone. You don't always love people, and that is okay, but knowing that you can like them and be friends with them is good.
Love is a choice. You choose to love someone every single day.
Look at the married lady. Everyone should have a married friend, and she will remind you of all the great things.
All the weird things.
All the things look out for when you are also looking for a relationship. Just great sounding board to have. Truly.
I am there for you.
I highly endorse this. But for a while, and listen. My books have to have happily ever afters. I'm sorry. I understand that in real life, that's not always the case. I get it. I'm not always looking for that in a story, in a book. I want them to end up together. There better be a happily ever after when I close my book. But for a while...
people don't understand why I read spoilers, and this is why. Because my real life can get hard enough if if it doesn't have a happily ever after, and I'm not in the headspace to read a story that doesn't have a happily ever after, I can't touch it because it will mess with my head.
Yep.
Which is why it just goes back to our point of not every book is for every person, and that's okay.
It's okay.
And a book may be for you too, but it might not be the right time for you to read that book too.
Go preach. Over then. Yes, it's very, very true. But for a while, I didn't think it was going to be a happily ever after. And, like, I was all on board for Joshua Avery. I understand why he's on the, like, list of t-shirts of, like, book boyfriends. Mm-hmm. Jenna and Audrey, and I was like, my soulmates are fictional. This man is my soulmate. I love him in all aspects. Whoever this dude is, where do I buy one? Is he on Amazon? Like, 2-day shipping. He was great. But what I loved, and I'm all for both characters growing, because everyone is always growing. Mm-hmm. I loved that he was a constant, steady person. He was confident in who he was, in his relationship with God, and all the things. And he had a wonderful, healthy family relationship that made him who he was. And I loved that, because that was exactly what Lauren, the girl character, needed.
Yeah.
He needed to see what a healthy family relationship looked like, and a relationship with God looked like, all these things, and how to trust. And then they made the biggest sacrifice, and they stepped away from each other. Mm-hmm. And it, if you love them, let them go.
If you love someone, set them free. And if they love you, they'll come back.
It was like all those cliche little signs. But I mean, the saying had to come from somewhere. Yep. And it worked. They were mature. And here's the big kicker. They communicated with each other.
Alicia, characters communicating?
What? What is talking?
I feel like that's a whole point in and of itself, is just a healthy portrayal of people who communicate. Mm-hmm. And don't just, like, hide things or keep things a secret for drama. If it's just for drama. I can see it to a point if a character struggles with, like, sharing their feelings. But if it's just for drama and they're not communicating, and it creates problems because, like, they are not saying things that really are things that should be said. If you are in a relationship with someone and there is, like, something that you're not saying and it's something big, I'm glad to hear that people can communicate in books and survive.
Amen, because I feel like it's not something we see all the time. Mm-hmm. Not always my favorite. It was just a very healthy, happy story that made me question a couple if it was going to end up that way.
Right.
Which is real life, because sometimes you question things. But it just, there was good banter, and there was, the moments where I was giddy, and I was like, oh my goodness, they're so cute. Look at these little text messages, right? There's other. But at the end of it, I took the substance of this. Wasn't just a romance to be romance. It was a true love story. All for it.
Ooh, that's a good point, is romance versus love story. I have thoughts.
Like, I have opened a can of worms.
You have, because, like, is it romance or is it a love story? Like, is it just kissing, or is it, like, actual growth? To your point too about, like, when both characters grow versus, like, one character needs more growth than another character, that's just true to life too. And, like, something even like, I'll share about my marriage, but, like, even in my marriage, there's times where, like, there have been times where, like, my husband has been going through a more rough patch than I have necessarily. And then there have been other times where I've been going through a really, really rough patch, and I've, like, leaned more on him. And, like, you know, in a real life, especially in like a years long relationship and in marriage, there's like ebbs and flows to everything, and you go through different levels of like struggling versus like, you know, valleys and hills, and sometimes you're at the top and sometimes you're low, and sometimes, you know, one person or the other kind of balances it out. Like ultimately Brandon is my husband and he's always like the leader for our family and he always leads us, but there's just times where like, you know, one of us is going through something and the other person kind of has to like carry them through it. And that's like true to life too. And it's good when you have people that you can count on. I really want to read that book too, because I saw you talking about it on Instagram and I was like, oh, this is different. Like, this is not just Alicia saying, oh, I loved this book, guys. Like, this is an Alicia loved this book.
And there was a difference.
There's a huge, you talk different about different books. And with this one, I was just like, oh. And it takes a lot to get me to stray outside of biblical fiction, people. So like
the contemporary side of things.
Yeah, like you know that it must be something special if Alicia is even tempting me to read this book when I so rarely stray outside of my genre. I feel like kind of keeping in line with that same theme is my next book on my list of love stories that I love in Christian fiction, and it is another series. Surprise, surprise, but it's the Daughters of Zealot series by Barbara M. Britton, and I can't pronounce that either, but
that is a mouthful. Good try.
Listen, I'm gonna be honest, I almost just picked a different book in this series, but I couldn't pronounce the character's name, so I was like, I'll go with this one. And I had points for both, so it's fine. But I'm focusing on this one because the characters' names are easier to pronounce. And I was less afraid of messing up. But this one, I think, is the second book in the series. And it's Heavenly Lights. I don't know if I said that already, if I just skipped over that information. But it's Heavenly Lights. And I think that's the second one in the series. And I love this one so much. Like, Noah, so if you don't know, I guess, because I didn't know until I read this series, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We all have our moments of not knowing things, but the Daughters of Zealot are real figures in the Bible. 5 girls, I think there's 5 daughters, and they, the Daughters of Zelophehad are left without their father, and they're going into the promised land, and there's all this stuff. But, like, if you read, I think it's Numbers 36 is where they're mentioned. It says, like, this is what the Lord commands for Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please as long as they marry within their father's tribal clan. And, like, basically God provides for them, even though they're in, like, kind of a not so great position. And he makes provisions for them so that they can marry and settle their land and have a portion of the promised land and stuff like that. So basically each book in the series follows, I think, a different one of the daughters. And this one follows Noah. And she, I think, is like a shepherdess. Yes, she's a shepherdess. Okay, so now into the actual book. Noah is a shepherdess, and I loved her character. Like, I love all of these characters. The reason I love these books so much is because, like, the girls in this book, in this series, are not, like, damsels in distress. Like, they know they're in a tough position. They know that they're going to go through a hard time. They know that, like, what they need to accomplish is going to be very difficult for them in their circumstances. But they're all just, like, can-do attitude. They've got it. They're going to get it done. Like, I loved it. And Noah in particular kind of takes on the role of, like, the family shepherdess, and she has this, like, strong work ethic, and she, you know, has, like, this desire to do things, and she's very close to, like, her animals and the animals she shepherds. It's just great, and I love her. Everyone around them knows that these girls are going to get an inheritance, and so a lot of people just want to marry them for their inheritance, which, like, classic trope. But she's just a very strong personality, and she's a very strong character. And when I say strong personality, I mean it. Like, she's determined, she's resilient, she's just a strong personality. And then you have Jeremiah, who's the main male character. And I believe in the story, he has a disability. He can't speak in the story, and so people don't really look at him necessarily as being very strong. But she sees him as strong. And then people don't look at her and see her as strong, but he's like, it's just great. Like, they both see each other's best qualities, and I love it. But something about this story that I loved is that it's kind of like a marriage of inconvenience. Like, they kind of are like at this point where, because of circumstances in the story, they have to get married, and they had feelings for each other before, but the way that their marriage kind of comes about, they just see each other in such a beautiful way. Like, the characters understand each other, and when one character is going through a hard time, the other character is there to kind of lift them up and support them, and I love that in this book. And I just love how they support each other and grow closer together, but they also see each other's best qualities, and they both can look past qualities that other people don't necessarily see past. And like, he faces a lot of adversaries in the story, but he's like still a strong character. It doesn't like weaken him. He's still like, he's amazing. I love him. He's beautiful. He's a great man. But like, they just both grow closer together, and they grow closer to God, and it's just really sweet. And like, Barbara's books are not super long books, but they're like, it's just, I love them. The stories are great, and anyone can read them. And I could have mentioned any of her books because I feel like the same sort of like comments applies to all of them, where the characters like just see each other in such a beautiful way, and they're not complicated. They're not overly complicated stories. Like, things don't get so out of hand, and like, there's not like drama just for the sake of drama. Like, they're just genuinely sweet stories, and I love them. So they both have to learn to trust God in difficult times, and they both have to, learn to let go of certain things and just fully lean into trust. And it's honestly just a really beautiful story, and I love them. And the focus on God in Barbara's books is just amazing, and the way characters learn things and just talk about God. Like, the characters genuinely have conversations about their faith and their relationship with God with each other. Like, it's just, I love it. I love Barbara. I love Heavenly Lights. I love the Daughters of Zealot. I love her Tribes of Israel series. They're all just amazing, and you should definitely check them out, and you should read them. And Alicia, you actually could read them because they're not actually that long.
Sign me up. You said, listen, there are times that I wish you could see our face. Because when she said marriage of inconvenience, I think my jaw hit the floor, and I was like, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so good. And I just love the way that, like, they both understand each other in a really sweet way. And because it's not a super long book, like, there's not too much drama where it's just drama for the sake of drama. And the characters are just really healthy, and they understand each other.
Know each other and not just on the outside and what other people see.
Exactly. Like, it's deeper.
If I could have one thing, if I could wish for something, it would be more books with married couples.
Yeah.
And I'm not like, any range of marriage is fine, but so I want like a young married couple going through different circumstances, or after they've just been married and trying to figure out the struggles of being a team now instead of just one single person. You are a partnership. So yeah, publishers, if you're listening out there, because I know you're all tuning in to listen to the Biblical Queen. Romance books with people who are married.
Yeah, and that is not saying that we want like all of the content. It can still be No, it can still be a closed door romance book.
Yeah. You can still show me, because relationships don't end as soon as a ring is placed on a finger. Anything, they change.
Yeah.
They grow. Still show me that without everything else.
Yeah, like there's so much more. A relationship is, although I'm about to get really philosophical. Although a story and a romance book may have a point A, a point B, and a grand finale in point C, in real life, a love story is forever. Like, it keeps going.
Later, where you close the book and you put it on your shelf and you look at it fondly with good memories.
I mean, imagine if you got married and then you were just like, okay, I'm done.
Like, that's it. According to my romance books, this is where it ends.
Like, life just gets paused. You just close the book of real life. Like, life goes on, my friends. Life keeps going. What other books do you have, if any?
Oh, let's see. Do I want my more shallow responses? Do I want, we'll go with this one.
I mean, listen, there's nothing wrong, like, with a more quote-unquote shallow book, although that's a subjective point in and of itself, but...
It is. That's very true.
Yeah.
Very. But I'll go with this one because when you were talking about your last book, it kind of made me think, I'm like, oh no, there's tie-ins with this. Even though it's a very different genre. But I grabbed Malicious Intent by Lynn H. Blackburn. Yes. Look at us with the suspense novels. But the characters, it's a second chance romance, which as a reader is not always my favorite trope to read. But this one was done so well because they knew each other for forever. Mm-hmm. And they were super serious, and then life just took them different ways, as life does.
Good old life.
Good old life.
The game of life. You rolled a 7 and you landed on taxes due. Oh no.
All the lemons. But they were both very strong characters. Mm-hmm. Like, Ivy is a very smart, strong, she is brilliant character who is not a damsel in distress.
Yeah.
And Gil is just Gil. He's just great. I love him. But he's a super strong, protective character. And he kind of struggles because on one hand, he wants to protect Ivy and do not necessarily everything for her, but he wants to keep her safe. He also could step back and say, she's a big girl. She can handle this on her own, but I'll be here for her no matter what. Whether she thinks she needs me or not, whether she can ask for help. Like, he could read her, and he just, when she needed something, and he was just there, and they were a great team. Like, they were both
couple.
They were power couple.
See, that's the word I was missing when I was trying to explain Barbara's books. Like, the characters in the Daughters of Zealot series are power couples. Like, they see each other, they understand each other, they know what they need to accomplish, they know, like, what the other person needs, and they just do it. Like,
do it. And it's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's just written beautifully, and I mean, there's a lot of drama in this book, but not necessarily like in the romance side, because hello, it's a book, so it's action packed for different reasons. But
I mean, listen, I love high stakes, dramatic, like seriously dramatic stories, but like there's a difference between a dramatic story and a story that just has a lot of drama.
Mm-hmm. That is like it's just there to be there.
Yeah.
Like this story, like it actually helped move the story along. But just, again, I think it really came from how well they knew each other, and they were, like, they became friends again before, and so they just went off that.
Yeah.
And it was fun. And I love Ivy and Gil so much.
I have no books on my list that don't have an insane amount of drama, because I read biblical fiction, and biblical fiction is a very dramatic genre. But,
tagline, I'm pretty sure, somewhere. Biblical fiction, the drama genre.
Yeah, the last book that I had is Jewel of the Nile by Tessa Afshar, which is like a slightly more recent read. And by recent, I mean like a year and a half ago. But still, like, I love Tessa Afshar's books so much. This one isn't even my favorite. Like, I love this one. I have others that I love more, but I just felt like in terms of romance, this was like the peak example. And that is Jewel of the Nile. And I loved this one for the same reason that I have loved literally every other book that I've mentioned. Like, there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing has changed. But just because the characters complement each other really well, they have similar struggles, but their struggles are also like kind of the opposite, or like the flipped around version of the other person's. So like Theo, the main male character, who I think is in like 2 of Tessa Afshar's other books besides this one, struggles with like God not being a loving father, and like a kind of refusal to accept that because he had a father that was not so loving, and so he doesn't see God as like a loving father. He just sees God as like someone who allows terrible things to happen and allows bad things to happen. And meanwhile, and her big thing is that she doesn't know who her father is, like her earthly father. She doesn't know who he is. His identity is a secret, and she goes on this whole wild, seriously overdramatic quest to find his identity. Like, there's boats and ships and sailing and assassins and all kinds of things because it's biblical fiction. So like, there's just a lot going on. But she's like on this quest to find her true father. So yeah, she like kind of assumes God's will, and she gets really hooked on this idea that she has this loving father out there, and like she puts everything ahead of, or she puts like this above everything else in her life. Like, everything she does is motivated by this one thing. And then you have Theo on the other hand, who like wants nothing to do with his father and can't accept that like God could have a fatherly love for him when like those horrible things happened. So their journeys are kind of the same, but they're also like the opposite of each other. So they complement, really, like, opposites attract. Opposites attract. They complement each other really, really well. And like, as they learn, I mean, okay, I just also want to point out, not all of my recommendations are super deep. Like, I want to point out that Theo, as a main male character, is the king of sassy one-liner comebacks in biblical fiction, okay? Like,
love it.
Like, I just want to point out, I am here for the banter too. Just because all I'm talking about is like the deep spiritual journeys and lessons of faith and life and love does not mean that the fun stuff isn't in these books too. But like, their journeys are opposite to each other, but they're also kind of the same journeys. And the thing is, because they're in such different places as each other, like, she has like this love for her father that she doesn't know, that's above everything else to her, and he is like struggling with the idea of like having a father who could love him, like a heavenly father that loves him. Because their journeys are opposite, they see what the other person needs when the other person can't see that. And I love it, and I'm obsessed with them in like a healthy way, I promise. And like, they just learn
People in a healthy way. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with books in a healthy way. They learn such beautiful lessons. They like understand each other so well, more than like they understand certain parts of themselves. So like, as you know, like, they kind of, as they get to know each other, they point out things in the other person that the other person doesn't see necessarily, and like, they make each other better. And that's like the thing too, is like, the best romances, the best love stories, ultimately the characters should make each other into better characters and like complement each other and like bring out the best in each other. They just truly encourage one another and they make each other shine, versus characters that like, when they're together, they are like the worst versions of themselves. And that's true in like real life too. Like, you want to find someone that will bring out the best in you, and like, just, yeah, I just love it. But they bring out the best in each other, and that's what I love about Jewel of the Nile by Tessa Afshar.
I think that takes a skilled author.
Yeah.
To do. as well, is making sure that the opposites aren't so opposite that they can't complement each other.
Mm-hmm. It's like, it goes back to like kind of what we were saying at the beginning about like having what the other character needs, but then like, yeah, it's just so good. I love love.
I love love.
I love love, and I love when love is done well.
Yes.
There's just something special about Christian fiction and Christian fiction love stories. They've just got that extra something that makes them so fun to read, and like there's something in it for everyone, whether you want something that's more like hard hitting or something that's more just a little bit lighthearted and like sweet romance, clean romance, like that kind of thing. There's something for all kinds of readers, and it's beautiful, and a lot of them are really, really good.
Sum it all up perfectly.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our discussion on Christian fiction romance novels and our favorite, or some of our favorite, love stories in Christian fiction and what we love to see in a good Christian fiction romance book. My name is Jenna Van Mourik. You all know who I am. You can find me on Instagram at Jenna Van Mourik, or join Biblical Fiction Buffs book club and discussion group by following us at Biblical Fiction Buffs on Instagram, or learn more at www.authorjennavanmourik.com. Alicia, tell us where we can find you, what you do.
Well, you can find me everywhere, pretty much. You can find me on Instagram and on Facebook, and on my blog at fortheloveofchristianfiction.blogspot.com. And then I'm also on YouTube at For the Love of Christian Fiction.
And you also have a book box.
I do. If anyone's going to do all my marketing for me, it will be Jenna.
And if anyone will do my marketing for me, it will be Alicia in person, because I don't talk at conferences. But yeah, she has a book box too, and it's the Faith and Fiction book box, and it's really, really cool, and they're super fun and super cute, and you should definitely check that out as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will talk to you in the next episode.